Welcome to Washington Today for February 14th, 2022. It's Valentine's Day. I'm Gary Sterikoff. Thanks a lot for joining us. Here are some headlines. The State Department has announced it is closing the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv, temporarily relocating its remaining staff. Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced today that the move was, quote, due to the dramatic acceleration of the buildup of Russian forces. This comes days after the U.S. ordered the vast majority of government employees to leave the country. We'll hear more on this coming up from State Department spokesman Ned Price. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau plans to invoke rarely used emergency powers to end the anti-vaccine mandate protests around the country. The Prime Minister will use the country's Emergencies Act to stop the so-called Freedom Convoy protesters who have blocked traffic in Ottawa and at border crossings since late last month. The Prime Minister said there were no current plans to deploy the military against the protesters, but invoking the act would allow the Canadian government to declare the Ottawa protest illegal and make greater use of the Mounties, the Canadian federal police force. And the Senate is back in session today and poised to take up the House-passed bill to keep the government open past February 18th. But the bill is being held up by Tennessee Republican Marsha Blackburn over a $30 million Health and Human Services Department grant program. Senator Blackburn's hold could prevent senators from expediting the funding extension. We'll talk about that coming up as well. But we begin at the United Nations, where late this afternoon, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres delivered a statement on the ongoing situation on the Ukraine border, where Russia has stationed some 130,000 troops.
Good afternoon. I am deeply worried by the heightened tensions and increased speculation about a potential military conflict in Europe. The price in human suffering, destruction and damage to European and global security is too high to contemplate. We simply cannot accept even the possibility of such a disastrous confrontation. I will remain fully engaged in the hours and days to come. I just spoke this morning with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation and of Ukraine. And my message is clear. There is no alternative to diplomacy. All issues, including the most intractable, can and must be addressed and resolved through diplomatic frameworks. It is my firm belief that this principle will prevail. The United Nations country team remains fully operational in the Ukraine. As United Nations Secretary General, it is my duty to appeal for the full respect of the United Nations Charter, a fundamental pillar of international law. The Charter clearly says, and I quote, "All members shall settle their international disputes by peaceful means in such a manner that international peace and security and justice are not endangered. All members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state or any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. The time is now to diffuse tensions and de-escalate actions on the ground. There is no place for incendiary rhetoric. Public statements should aim to reduce tensions, not inflame them. I welcome the recent flurry of diplomatic contacts and engagements, including between heads of state, but more needs to be done, and I expect all to intensify their efforts. I've made my good offices available, and we will have no stone unturned in the search for a peaceful solution. Abandoning diplomacy for confrontation is not a step over a line, it is a dive over a cliff. In short, my appeal is this: do not fail the cause of peace. Thank you.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, late Monday afternoon at the United Nations in New York. Here in D.C., Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced that the State Department is closing the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv and temporarily relocating its remaining staff to the city of Lviv in western Ukraine. With more on that, here's State Department spokesman Ned Price.
You all have seen the recent travel advisory updates for Ukraine and the announcement that came out just a short time ago. So let me start by saying this. We don't take this sort of action without the most thorough deliberation. And over the course of the last few days, these deliberations have led to a series of staffing changes in Ukraine. We feel all of these actions were absolutely necessary, and decisions were made with one thing and one thing in mind, and that is the safety and security of US citizens and our colleagues on the ground. Now, let me tell you what made this necessary. Russia's continued escalation and seriously threatening military posture, as we have all seen in recent weeks and recent days. We are basing our assessment on what we are seeing on the ground with our own eyes, which is a continued and unprovoked Russian buildup on the border with Ukraine and no accompanying evidence of de-escalation. It is a distinct possibility, perhaps more real than ever before, that Russia may decide to proceed with military action. With new Russian forces continuing to arrive at the Ukrainian border, and Russian forces staged all around Ukraine, an invasion, as we have said, could begin at any time. Should Putin decide to order it, there would be widespread human suffering. All the while, we are actively working to try to reach a diplomatic solution, and we remain engaged with the Russian government following President Biden's call with President Putin over the weekend. But since no one has full visibility into President Putin's decision-making, and there hasn't, as I said before, been any tangible sign of de-escalation, we have taken the prudent steps of updating the travel advisory for Ukraine to urge US citizens to leave Ukraine immediately using any available mode of transportation. And now, most recently, as you saw just a little bit ago, we are in the process of relocating our diplomatic staff from Kyiv to Lviv. The staff in Lviv, including our chargé, Christina Kyiv, will remain engaged with the Ukrainian government, coordinating on diplomatic efforts. We will continue our close coordination with Ukraine as well as with our allies and partners. Russia, if it sought to do so, has failed in its goal of dividing the United States and our allies and partners. If anything, we are more united as we confront Russia's threats and aggression. We are intensifying our efforts to deter Russia and to impose costs should Moscow decide to go ahead with military action. Whatever happens next, we are resolute in our support for Ukraine's sovereignty, for Ukraine's territorial integrity, and we will continue our assistance to the people of Ukraine. It remains unclear to us whether Russia is interested in pursuing a diplomatic path as opposed to the use of force. We remain committed to keeping the prospect of de-escalation through diplomacy alive. We will remain committed to doing that for as long as we can. But Russia must de-escalate and engage in genuine dialogue and diplomacy.
State Department spokesman Ned Price speaking earlier today. And on social media today, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that he's been told that Wednesday, February 16th, will be the day when Russia invades his country. At the Pentagon this afternoon, spokesman John Kirby talked about those reports of a possible February 16th attack.
Communications continue, and we just heard from President Zelensky that he's been told that an invasion will happen on February 16th, which is Wednesday. How do you reconcile?
Sure.
Putin hasn't taken a decision, but an invasion is happening on the 16th.
Well, I'm not going to talk about specific intelligence assessments. I think you can understand that. We have said for a while now that military action could happen any day. And you heard from the National Security Advisor making it clear that it certainly could happen before the end of the Olympics, maybe even this week. We have shared with our allies and partners, and that includes Ukraine, our assessment of the information that we've been receiving, and certainly have reflected in those conversations our deep concern about the continued capabilities that Mr. Putin has at his beck and call. So I won't get into a specific date. I don't think that would be smart. I would just tell you that it is entirely possible that he could move with little to no warning.
Mr. Kirby also talked about the posture of Russia's military at the Ukraine border.
The question about the Russian buildup on the border area of Ukraine, can you give a little bit more detailed description of the lay of the land there, like in recent days, for example, have some of the ground units that were in larger assembly areas moved out closer to the border into what might be attack positions, other movements over the last 24 hours or so?
Yeah, so what I'd say, Bob, is even over the last 24 to 48, over the course of the weekend, Mr. Putin has added military capability along that border with Ukraine and in Belarus. He is exercising some of his units on the ground there in the south, as well as his naval units in the Black Sea. So he continues to add to his readiness. He continues to give himself more options should he pursue a military path here. I'm not going to. I would like to refrain from getting into specific movements of their troops. I think that's probably not a wise thing for me to do with any great specificity. I would just say this: that he continues to advance his readiness should he choose to go down a military path here. Should he choose to invade again, he is doing all the things you would expect him to do to make sure he's ready for that option or options.
So there's no indication, for example, that what they've called exercises have ended in any way or are changing in any way, their presence either?
I want to be careful to characterize another nation's exercises. We've seen them conduct these exercises in recent days. Exercises are designed to make you ready. And that gets to my previous point. He continues to do the things that you would expect one to do if one was planning on a major military action, and that is to sharpen the readiness and to add to the capabilities of his force. Now, look, we obviously don't want that to be the outcome, and neither do the Ukrainians, and certainly neither do our NATO allies. And Foreign Minister Lavrov said earlier today that, or seemed to indicate that he still thinks there's oxygen here for diplomacy. We would welcome a pursuit of that path by the Russians, because we too believe that there still should be and can be a diplomatic path forward.
Pentagon spokesman John Kirby. You can see the entire briefing on our website at cspan.org. After a 40-minute phone call today, President Biden and British Prime Minister Boris Johnson both agreed a window for diplomacy remains open to de-escalate the situation between Russia and Ukraine. In a White House readout of their call, the two leaders also, quote, reviewed ongoing diplomatic and deterrence efforts in response to Russia's continued military buildup on Ukraine's borders and reaffirmed their support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. They discussed efforts to reinforce the defensive posture on NATO's eastern flank and underlined the continued close coordination among allies and partners, including on readiness to impose severe consequences on Russia should it choose further military escalation. With more on that, here's White House Deputy Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre.
What is the reaction here to the Kremlin signaling that it's ready to continue dialogue over Ukraine? And does the White House see that as a sincere on the part of the Russians?
So, yeah. Thank you for the question. We are actively working to reach a diplomatic solution to de-escalate the crisis. Over the weekend, as you all know, the president spoke with President Putin, and we remain engaged with the Russian government in full coordination with our allies and partners. The path for diplomacy remains available if Russia chooses to engage constructively. However, we are clear-eyed about the prospects of that given the steps Russia is taking on the ground in plain sight. This is something that the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, talked about right here on Friday. Right before our eyes, what we're seeing with Russia. We're seeing new Russian forces have been arriving at the Ukrainian border every day. As we have said before, we're in the window when an invasion could begin at any time. We will not comment on any details of our intelligence information, except to say that it could begin this week, despite a lot of speculation that it would happen after the Olympics. Again, something that Jake Sullivan said right here on Friday. It remains unclear which path Russia will choose to take. The U.S. is ready for any situation. You know, President Biden has made it very clear on his call with Putin this weekend that if Russia undertakes a further invasion of Ukraine, the United States, together with our allies and partners, will respond decisively and impose swift and severe costs on Russia. President Biden reiterated that a further Russian invasion of Ukraine would produce widespread human suffering and diminish Russia's standing. So we are continuing to coordinate closely with our allies and partners. President Biden spoke with President Zelensky yesterday and Prime Minister Boris Johnson, as I just read out to you that call this afternoon. And we are in close contact with our allies again and partners again across all levels of government. Our partnership with our European and NATO allies have never been stronger and purposeful as we work collectively to de-escalate the tensions at the Ukraine-Russia border. If Russia should choose to invade, the severe economic consequences and irrevocable reputational damage caused by taking innocent lives for a bloody war will only weaken the country, not strengthen it.
Deputy White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, and as she mentioned, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan was on Capitol Hill today briefing senators on the situation. Following that briefing, Florida Republican Marco Rubio spoke to reporters.
Well, let me just say this in general, and I don't know if I want to get into all the specific questions because of the timing. This is a very dangerous situation, and not just because of Ukraine in and of itself. That's a deeply problematic. That we have two countries, but at this moment it's Moscow, most prominent, who's arguing that all the countries that border them should be tributary vassal states, and that they should have the right to go in and take them. And so if they did that, as it appears that they will, that's obviously going to put the world in a very difficult place. It's going to change the way the world looks, and what people have to do about it. And there has to be significant consequences for it. And I think you also, at the same time, have to balance a second concern, which is just as important, and that is, how quickly something like this could escalate into something very dangerous and catastrophic. You have the largest Russian military exercise, 35 or 40 years. You have NATO forces, including American troops, small number, operating in NATO countries on a heightened level of alert, operating in very close proximity of each other. If there's an invasion, we know there'll be sanctions. Putin will respond to those, potentially with cyber or some other attack, but no one's ever waged a cyber conflict. These things could rapidly escalate into something far more dangerous. So this is a very tense moment, and I think it's important to begin to think about it in those terms. How do you impose real consequences while avoiding miscalculation?
Florida Republican Senator Marco Rubio speaking to reporters following a Capitol Hill briefing by National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. Senator Rubio is a member of the Foreign Relations and Intelligence Committees. Also speaking about this situation was Intel Chairman and Virginia Democrat Mark Warner.
Putin has moved so many forces so close to the border that he may not even have the ability to fully pull back. And whereas as intelligence and Jake Sullivan from the administration has indicated, where potentially before this might have been a small movement in the east, it now appears that Kyiv, the capital, could be under assault, that you could have a major European land war breaking out literally this week. I do think it's important, and I think one thing the administration has done well is kind of rally NATO. So, as I'm sure your viewers know, virtually every day there's another president, prime minister going to Ukraine. The German chancellor's there today. He'll be in Moscow tomorrow. We're seeing these images of Ukrainians training on the weekend. We hope that's those images Putin is seeing. Putin is so isolated at this point. And I think the intelligence community, by leaning in and indicating, before Russian false flag or an attempt to say Ukrainians started this, where we're showing, hey, if you see a video of what appears to be, Ukrainians attacking Russians with dead bodies, that's actually Russians, or if you see a coup attempt, that's actually Russia. To forewarn, I think that's very forward-leaning. So I'm concerned on all these fronts. And you mentioned one thing before we went to the break about cyber. This is particularly concerning to me because if you think back in 2017, Russia attacked Ukraine with what was then called a NotPetya cyber attack, tried to deny service. Because cyber attacks don't know geographic boundaries, that attack caused literally tens of billions of dollars of damage to American companies. If they launch a cyber attack with full force before a kinetic invasion, it knows no geographic boundaries. The chances of that hitting American companies, maybe not targeting American companies, but hitting American companies means we need to be on guard. And what is even more concerning to me is if, for example, the Russians decided they're going to try to shut out all the lights in Ukraine and attack their power network. That could also affect Poland, which is a NATO ally, and if that were to somehow cause harm or havoc in eastern Poland with the NATO forces, all of these hypotheticals about what constitutes an Article 5 violation where you have to come to assistance of any country, NATO country that's attacked, could move from hypothetical to real. So this is a very dangerous week.
Senate Intelligence Committee Chair Mark Warner earlier today on MSNBC. And also speaking on this was South Carolina Republican Lindsey Graham.
There's 70 votes in the body for invasion sanctions, pre-invasion sanctions with a waiver, post-invasion sanctions. The problem has been secondary sanctions. It's not just enough to sanction a Russian bank. You want to sanction anybody that does business with that bank. And we're really got to be hard on Nord Stream 2. We got to convince the Russians that the Congress will destroy Nord Stream 2 as a cash cow for Putin. And we need to have a robust set of sanctions regarding the SWIFT program so that Putin would understand that the relationship with the United States would be forever changed. And finally, I want to make that point. This is not the last president America will have. If Russia invades the Ukraine, you will destroy the U.S.-Russian relationship for decades, and every president in the near term will be put in a box when it comes to dealing with Russia. So I hope Putin understands that.
What do you make of this overall strategy we're seeing from the administration, releasing this intelligence about possible invasions, saying imminent invasion, saying maybe there'll be a false flag operation? Do you think that maybe has been effective in pushing Putin back?
I don't know. That's a really good question. I don't want to ring alarm bell as much as take action. They're telling us the invasion is imminent, but they're not telling Putin with clarity what happens if you invade. He should be punished now. What I can't get over is that the world is allowing him to do all this without consequence. The guy took the Crimea in 2014. He's got 100,000 troops amassed on the Ukrainian border, and he's paying no price at all. So I'd like to hit him now for the provocation and have sanctions spelled out very clearly what happens to the ruble and his oil and gas economy. I think that's what's missing. We're talking way too much and we're doing too little.
South Carolina Republican Lindsey Graham yesterday on ABC News This Week. You're listening to Washington Today.
Live Tuesday on C-SPAN Radio at 10 a.m. Eastern, Treasury Department Undersecretary Nellie Lang testifies about a federal report looking at the risks and regulatory framework for the cryptocurrency stablecoins. She'll be before the Senate Banking Committee. And live Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern, House Homeland Security Subcommittee hears testimony about the 6,000 guns found in carry-on luggage at TSA checkpoints at airports nationwide in 2021. Listen to C-SPAN Radio live on 90.1 FM in the Washington, D.C. metro area and anywhere on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app.
Welcome back to Washington Today. Here are some more headlines. The judge overseeing former Alaska Governor Sarah Palin's defamation suit against the New York Times said that he will dismiss the lawsuit, ruling that Ms. Palin's team did not prove a key element of its case. Judge Jed Rakoff said Ms. Palin's attorneys did not prove the legal standard of actual malice, which they had to meet in the case. Judge Rakoff said he will allow the jury to continue deliberating and to reach a verdict, and then dismiss the case once it has done so. The former Alaska governor sued the New York Times in 2017 after it published an editorial that erroneously linked a map that Ms. Palin's Political Action Committee had posted to a shooting in 2011 that killed 6 and injured former Arizona Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords. The ongoing extreme drought that has ravaged the American West now ranks as the driest period there in the last 1,200 years. According to a study in the journal Nature Climate Change, the West's current megadrought is now worse than a late 16th century dry spell, and it's largely in part due to human-induced climate change. The study looked at tree ring patterns and historical climate data from the region between southern Montana to northern Mexico and the Pacific Ocean to the Rocky Mountains, and found that climate change is responsible for 42% of the soil moisture deficit since the year 2000. Lead author Park Williams said that without climate change, the past 2 decades would have probably still been the driest period in 300 years, but, quote, it wouldn't be holding a candle to the megadroughts of the 1500s, 1200s, or 1100s. The U.S. has suspended all imports of Mexican avocados after a U.S. plant safety inspector in the state of Michoacan received a threatening message. According to the Associated Press, Michoacan is the only state in Mexico fully authorized to export avocados to the U.S., so the suspension effectively amounts to a pause on all Mexican avocado imports. The state is also home to turf battles between drug cartels. Those battles regularly involve the extortion of avocado farmers. And if you watched the Super Bowl last night, you saw the final network sports appearance of sideline reporter Michelle Tafoya. Well, today she announced that she will serve as co-chair of Republican Kendall Qualls' governor's campaign in Minnesota. Michelle Tafoya has worked the sideline for more than 320 NFL games, including 5 Super Bowls. And in an exclusive interview with The Athletic, she said, quote, I got to a point in my life where I wanted to try other things, and there are some things that are really important to me. Kendall Qualls is a businessman and Army veteran. He announced his campaign last month. Ms. Tafoya also told The Athletic that she plans to attend the Conservative Political Action Conference, which is scheduled to begin here in D.C. on February 24th. The D.C. government is dropping its indoor vaccine and mask mandates. Muriel Bowser announced on Monday. She's the D.C. mayor. She pointed to the district's plummeting COVID-19 cases for lifting the mandates. Cases are down 38% since the start of the month to a daily rate of 22 cases per capita. That's still slightly over the number of daily cases from the pre-Omicron days. Here's Mayor Bowser making the announcement.
So, to be more specific, masks will not be required at restaurants and bars or sports and entertainment venues, gyms and rec centers, houses of worship, businesses, grocery stores, pharmacies, retail establishments, and D.C. government offices with no public interaction. Masks will still be required at any private business that requires the use of masks and puts up signage to that effect. Masks will still be required at schools, child care facilities and libraries, congregate facilities, nursing homes, assisted living facilities, shelters, dorms, and correctional facilities, healthcare and medical facilities, public transit, taxis, and rideshare vehicles, and D.C. government facilities with direct interaction between employees and the public. As an example, our DMV service centers and DHS service centers, to name 2. Additionally, beginning tomorrow, February 15th, as you know, the limited public health emergency that I put in effect in December expires, as will the requirement for indoor venues to verify that patrons are vaccinated. Again, businesses may choose to keep vaccination requirements in place at their establishment with appropriate signage.
D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, she was made the announcement earlier today. D.C. is the only city in the region to impose a vaccine mandate. And just hours after the announcement, Montgomery County, Maryland Council President Gabriel Albornoz said that its indoor mask mandate will end on February 21st. On Capitol Hill, the Senate is back in session today and poised to take up the House-passed bill to keep the government open and running past February 18th. Speaking from the Senate floor, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer urged his colleagues to pass the bill after the House passed the bill last week, but it is being held up by Republican Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee over allegations that a $30 million federal grant program aimed at helping substance abuse was distributing drug paraphernalia. The objection followed a report by the Washington Free Beacon that the program would fund the distribution of crack pipes to drug addicts. That's a claim the Biden administration has denied. Here's Majority Leader Schumer.
Now, Madam President, our other priority this week will be approving legislation to keep the government open until March 11th, so we can give appropriators from both parties more time to draft a year-long omnibus funding bill. There's another place we're making bipartisan progress, led by Senators Leahy and Shelby and their counterparts in the House, Senators DeLauro and Granger. We have come to good agreements on top-line numbers, and we can move forward, not with a CR, which simply just reenacts what's been in place last year, despite the need for changes in many ways, but we can enact what we call an omnibus, which is what we should be doing. So we've had positive conversations, and Democrats are united to keep the government open so we can achieve this omnibus. We will continue working with the Republican leadership to move forward on a CR before the deadline later this week.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer earlier today on the floor. Senator Blackburn's objections threatens to stall the bill's passage by requiring more procedural steps than if it had unanimous consent, and it could also prompt changes to the legislation, which of course would require the House to pass the bill again, all before Friday's deadline. With more on the week ahead in Washington, here's Tia Mitchell of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and Eric Wasson from Bloomberg News.
We'll jump right into it because the House is out this week, the Senate's in, and I just want to ask you both if you think the president will make the announcement this week of his Supreme Court choice, and what do you think the process looks like in the coming weeks on that?
Well, I'll start off. I think that no, I don't think he's ready. I don't think this week he'll be ready. Kind of going off of some comments that came out of the White House and also came after he met with Democrats on the Judiciary Committee on Thursday, it does look like the president has narrowed down the list to, about 4 candidates that he's really seriously considering and looking into their background. And perhaps the interviewing process could start this week, perhaps. But I don't think he's sat down with those final candidates. And then it's still going to take, I would think at least 2 more weeks for him to really be ready to publicly announce who he's going to nominate.
And Eric Wasson, how quickly do you think, once that announcement is made, will it be shepherded through to the Senate Judiciary Committee and the Senate floor?
Well, a key factor in all this is Senator Ben Ray Lujan of New Mexico. We were all heartened, those who know him and have covered him for years, to see over the weekend he released a video saying that he's recovering from this stroke he had in the back part of his brain. It'd be a couple more weeks before he can return to the Senate. So that's really driving the timeline. They don't have a functioning majority of the Democrats right now in the Senate. It's 50-50, and unless they can convince Republicans, which certainly they are trying. They've reached out to Romney and Lindsey Graham and Susan Collins and Murkowski and others to try to get that crucial bipartisan support. But they would like to have Lujan back, I'm sure, to make sure they don't have to rely on that. So I would say we're looking at March or April probably before we see a floor vote.
Tia Mitchell, I want you to tie this into the rest of the president's agenda, certainly what's ahead in the spring. And your article that you wrote about black voters' approval of Biden declines amid a stalled agenda. And you wrote about their lag of enthusiasm in the black respondents to the AJC poll. What does the president have to get done to get those numbers back up?
I think, there's what black voters, I think, would like to see, and that's different than what Biden can actually do right now. But I do think if in some of the things that any voter would like to see are outside of the president's control, such as some of the prices coming down and the cost of gas coming down. So I think if that happens, that will help Biden's approval. But as far as what he can do, if he could get a chunk of that Build Back Better agenda passed, that would help. I think if some of those infrastructure dollars can start rolling out, or at least the plans for the infrastructure dollars can start rolling out, that will help. And again, the American Rescue Plan is still being implemented, even though it's almost a year since it passed. That money's still rolling out. But I think the tangible examples of what the American Rescue Plan did for voters will also help.
Yeah, on the infrastructure, the president speaking, I believe, Thursday, heading out to the Midwest to talk about that infrastructure law. And correct me if I'm wrong, either of you. My understanding, because that's a basic authorization bill, because the new spending for fiscal year 2022 hasn't been approved. None of that infrastructure money is actually rolling out quite yet. Am I wrong about that?
It's not that none of it, but there are some of it that are contingent on the appropriations process. Congress has this two-step process: authorization, as we see with the defense bill, and then actually appropriating it. And appropriating is where the rubber hits the road. So, yeah, actually, they're trying by March 11th to implement a long-delayed, fiscal 2022 spending bill, and that would unlock, if they continue to get off a continuing resolution, about $197 billion out of that $550 billion infrastructure bill is still tied up. So they do need to move that. I'm not really seeing Republicans trying to, play games with that or block it to hold up Biden. It's really a fight between Republicans and Democrats of how much to give to the Pentagon. There's talk of giving the Pentagon $25 billion, above last year. Republicans would want the same for the domestic social agencies. If it's going to be higher, they want the same amount in what they call parity.
And Eric Wasson, you're writing about Joe Manchin continuing to be a key factor, certainly on the Senate side. The headline: White House shifts to deficit reduction to get Manchin's vote. Joe Manchin concerned about the inflation as well. Tell us what you're writing about there.
Well, it's interesting. He continues to cite inflation as one of his main objections to the Build Back Better plan. This is the $2 trillion Biden climate change, social spending, and tax increase agenda that passed the House in November. When you look at the actual analysis of that, it has only really a minor inflationary impact. It's about 0.1% or 0.2% over 2 years, according to the Penn-Wharton budget model, and that's mostly due to the child tax credit payments, these monthly up to $300 payments that were going to parents. That part is probably the most endangered part of the agenda. If you scrap that, it probably is maybe a net negative for inflation. So one thing the administration can do is resell this as an inflation fighting measure, and also to try to up the deficit reduction. Under the White House calculations, it reduces the deficit by about $100 billion over 10 years. That includes IRS tax enforcement. That's been controversial with the CBO. But you could up that. You could keep a lot of the tax increases on the wealthy and businesses, reduce the spending, and have up to probably $1 trillion in deficit reduction. And that would have a political advantage as well for Democrats. It's going to be a leading attack line by Republicans in the midterm election. So there's certainly some appeal, and White House aides are weighing it. Progressives, on the other hand, will probably not be too thrilled with that. You have to cut a lot of big priorities for them, whether it's housing, education, and so forth, out of this agenda in order to make those numbers work. So we'll see how that plays out.
Eric Wasson from Bloomberg News, along with Tia Mitchell of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution on today's Washington Journal. You can see more at cspan.org/WJ and also on the free C-SPAN Now video app. And finally, it is Valentine's Day, and First Lady Dr. Jill Biden celebrated it at the White House today. Heart-shaped artwork from local students was seen hanging in the windows on the East Landing, and 22nd grade students from Ayton Elementary School here in D.C., who helped create some of the decorations, along with their teacher, Alejandro Diaz-Granados, joined the First Lady this afternoon on the North Lawn.
Hey guys! Can everybody see me?
Yeah, so we'll say Happy Valentine's Day on 3, all right?
Yeah. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Happy Valentine's Day! Good job, everybody. Thanks. Dr. Biden, where did you get the corsage? It was a gift from Joe for Valentine's.
Good job, guys.
Thank you. Thank you for buying us. Let's go see what you drew. Let's go see your stuff.
And pictures of that corsage, you can find them on Twitter. Apparently, it's an annual tradition between the Bidens. Also seen on the North Lawn, a large hand-painted wooden heart, accompanied by wooden cutouts of the Bidens' pets, Commander the dog and Willow the cat, and the famous New Testament quote, "3 things will last forever: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love." Valentine's Day at the White House this afternoon. If you missed any of this program, you can find it at cspan.org/podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like more on the stories that are shaping Washington delivered daily right to your inbox, you can subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter, word for word. Just go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Hope you have a happy Valentine's Day, and thanks for listening today to Washington Today.
I can report to the nation, America is on the move again.
Live Tuesday, March 1st, the State of the Union. President Biden addresses a joint session of Congress and the nation, reflecting on his first year in office and laying out his agenda for the year ahead. Live coverage begins at 8 p.m. Eastern. The president speaks at 9, followed by the Republican response, and will take your phone calls and social media reaction. The State of the Union Address, live Tuesday, March 1st at 8 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN, cspan.org, or on the C-SPAN Now video app.